Claire Miller, Chief Executive Officer with the New South Wales Irrigators Council. Thanks for joining us this morning on Flow.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on.
Now, the disallowance that went through the New South Wales Parliament yesterday was of a regulation to do with floodplain harvesting. Can you give us some background of why that regulation came into existence and what your view is on the disallowance?
So what the regulations were intended to do is something that everyone agrees, everyone, including the politicians who disallowed it, is that floodplain harvesting needs to be regulated, it needs to be reduced. So the total take in the Northern Basin is brought down to the 1994 cap on diversions and consistent with the Basin Plan sustainable diversion limits. So there is wide agreement that floodplain harvesting needs to be reduced, licensed and measured, metered. And that's exactly what these regulations did. So it's extremely disappointing after many years and many millions of dollars being spent on technical reports to sort of basically support this reform. It's been 20 years in the making. To see it disallowed yesterday for just basically for political reasons. Has
it been mischaracterised what the regulation was actually about? There were some claims that it was about enabling more floodplain harvesting.
No, quite the opposite. There has been widespread misinformation about what the reform does and certainly what the results would be. Actually, it will reduce the take from floodplain harvesting by up to a third. That depends on different valleys. And we know of individual irrigators who have been receiving what the government was intending to licence them for, and they're looking at up to two-thirds cut in the volume of water that they can access when it floods. So it reduces the volume of water take substantially. That obviously means a hit for irrigators and for their service industries and their towns and employment and jobs. But as an industry, we supported these reforms. We supported reducing and licensing and metering floodplain harvesting take because it's the right thing to do, because it's a sustainable way of making sure that our water take is within sustainable diversion limits. And we wanted this reform to go through.
So the government's within its rights to, I've seen all sorts of tactics, but they're within their rights to table a similar regulation again, but it seems to me like maybe they'll have to go back to further consultation and maybe have another go fairly soon?
They've already been through substantial consultation on the regulations themselves. They've been extremely transparent. All of the technical reports have been up on the website. They've done multiple consultations with all groups with an interest in this particular reform. That's been occurring over the last 6 months. They've worked with the MPs and made themselves available to them. They've had the technical reports have been reviewed by independent experts in their field, particularly the modelling reports that show basically determine or show the extent of floodplain harvesting compared with total water flowing through the system, for instance. And modelling what it needs to come back to be consistent with the 1994 cap on diversions. They've done all of that work, and people and MPs had more than ample opportunity during all of that period. They could have asked for further review by independent experts of the modelling, and they didn't do so. So we're having trouble working out, well, what do you expect? Because it seems they say we don't trust anything that comes out of the department or anything that comes out of the government. They want to, get a better handle on measuring what floodplain harvesting take has been, but they've actually just voted down or disallowed the regulation that exactly would do that.
And the result would
enable the measuring of floodplain harvesting. So I've got to say at this point, we're at a bit of a loss to know what more do you want? Because it seems to me they're saying, well, the government's got to go back to the drawing board and do more consultation and do more modelling work. But based on the experience of the last 12 months, you'd have to say there's a high chance that upper house MPs will still say, oh, we don't trust anything that comes out of the government anyway.
Yeah,
So I think the ball's very much in their court to say, well, what are the technical reports and who do you think should be doing them?
So the 21-15 result is, you'd take that as a footy score, but in a way you only need 3 votes to flip and it's 18-all. But it does seem to me that rather than looking at the crossbench, it's Labor that the government would be probably trying to talk to if they've got a serious commitment to water recovery and the Murray-Darling Basin plan. If they could get them to come to the party, then a whole lot of numbers would come behind the government.
And again, the government did make the experts in the department available to walk through the issues and questions that the Labor Party had. So they did make a big effort in the last 6 months or so, the last few months particularly, to do that engagement with Labor. What we've really got here, though, is 2 quite separate issues being conflated. So we've got regulations for floodplain harvesting to reduce it and to licence it and to measure it. And the result will be that when it does flood, you will get more water travelling downstream. But when it floods, connectivity is not an issue. And we know that from the floods that are making their way down through the Barb and Darling now. We had unrestricted floodplain harvesting, and that's, as I say, we support regulated floodplain harvesting. But, the status quo at the moment remains because the regulations didn't go through. And so that occurred with floods in the border rivers and Guida valleys last month. And despite that, where you can see the floods are still coming down, you've got a massive amount of water that's coming into Menindee now.
Yes.
That's going to trigger the MDBA taking control of that resource, and that's going to bolster general security entitlements in the New South Wales Murray next season, which is great news, and and it's terrific. So you can see that connectivity isn't an issue like when it floods.
Yep. But
the issue is how do you sort of improve connectivity with river flows and things during droughts? So that's got nothing to do with floodplain harvesting because that only happens when it floods. So what do you do to improve connectivity during droughts and dry periods, and particularly when droughts break? So that's first flush. And that's the work that the government is working on now to make sure that there are already rules in place where irrigation extraction can be suspended. We saw that occur in January this year. That rule was brought in so that when we had a bit of rain over Christmas, that water could get down into Menindee and down past things. So we've already got rules there to improve connectivity, but we need more rules and protocols around how to better manage first flush events, because the pilot one last year in February, I think could best be described as very poorly managed. So they've done the inquiry, they've got the recommendations. The government is, the department is starting to work through that now. It's going to take 12 months to do the science, because this thing does need to be based on science and not just gut feel and politics. Yep. And then another 12 months for the public consultation. So we absolutely support that. All of that occurring, but it's like people want to put the cart before the horse. They say we don't want to regulate floodplain harvesting, which is when connectivity is not an issue, because we want rules and regulations and triggers and things around dealing with drought management and connectivity to improve environmental and cultural flows in dry periods, which is a separate issue. Yeah. And we wanted that to happen before the other one happened. So and that's fundamentally what the problem is here.
Yep. So there would be some irrigators that would actually be happy this disallowance succeeded, because now they can continue taking the amount of water that they have been taking and not face those 2/3 reductions.
Well, that's certainly our legal advice, is that the status, if the regulations were disallowed, then the status quo remains.
But yeah, as you say,
that is actually, ironically, not a win that we wanted as an industry.
That's right. As an industry, you support the metering and the regulation, but now the status quo remaining means that. Does it mean that theoretically the amount of water that is reaching the Menindee Lakes could have been more because there's now unregulated floodplain harvesting occurring?
Well, obviously, the regulations need to go through. So if, when floodplain harvesting is reduced, licensed and metered, then yes, in another event similar to what we've seen in the last 6-8 weeks, more water, a bit more water would get down into Menindee. Obviously, it's a river system that does have very high losses and things, but yes, more water would get down. Down there. So it's just a huge missed opportunity there's an irony here that we feel like, as the industry, the irrigation industry, we were the ones supporting the reforms and wanting them to go through, and that seemed to make our motives suspect.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's a lot...
Again, a great irony, there must be some sort of... and it's like, no, it is just what it is. We supported this, and we wanted it to go through, and we're sort of feeling a bit like, how come we're the only ones saying, cut back our water access?
Yeah. Well, it does sound like there needs to be some peace offerings or some attempt at diplomacy within the halls of Parliament House in Sydney to try and get this thing back on the table. So we'll see what happens and do keep us informed.
We will continue to work with all parties. We continue to work with all of the stakeholders as well, and our door is always open.
Yep. Well, Claire Miller, thank you for speaking with us today from the New South Wales Irrigators Council. Much appreciated.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.